Hello and welcome to the London Legal Podcast, presented by Hodge, Jones and Allen Solicitors. Our leading solicitors share their views on latest legal issues and developments, and how the law might affect you, because we care about righting wrongs and providing first-class personal legal services. So please enjoy this, the London Legal Podcast, presented by Hodge, Jones and Allen Solicitors.
Welcome to our podcast. My name is Bahareh Amani. I'm a senior associate in the Housing and Property Dispute team and the firm's diversity champion. Today we have with us Daniel Fitzpatrick, who is our Deputy Head of Housing, Chun Wong, partner in the dispute resolution team, and Donjeta Canolli, paralegal in our crime team. I'm looking to discuss from 4 different perspectives what International Women's Day means to us, the treatment or mistreatment and the progression of women throughout their personal careers and in terms of those challenges that our clients may face. For me, as a solicitor, a mother, a female, someone who has had a hard time getting into this profession, what does International Women's Day mean for me? For me, it's all about recognition, acceptance, and progression that women continue to make, the barriers that we break and the celebrations that come across from all our achievements. Everyone has their own story, everyone has had their own difficulties, but for me, having a day on the 8th of March every year to celebrate, recognise and understand the achievements of women, despite the difficulties they faced, I think is most important. On the 8th of March, this year's campaign is Break the Bias, and we are looking at celebrating International Women's Day by breaking inequalities, raising awareness against bias, and by taking action for equality. We also look to celebrate social, economic, and political achievements of women all around the world. So, taking all of that into account, we've got 3 great people to have a discussion with, and each of us will hopefully be able to bring our own perspectives as to how we feel about International Women's Day, what it means to us, and our own personal positions and journeys. So I would like to start off with you, Donjeta, and if you can just tell me about yourself, give me a bit of a background and tell me why law.
So my background is that I am an Albanian from Kosovo. I moved to the United States when I was 6 years old as a refugee. My family went through the Kosovan War. Growing up with that background set me up for a desire for a career in law. It's something I discussed most recently with my sister, where she used the phrase that law chose me. I did not choose law. I found the phrase she used quite eye-opening because I had never thought of my chosen career path in that way. I was always under the impression that I was the one who had created and chased this desire in my mind to become a lawyer. And having to grow up in a foreign country where English wasn't my first language and it wasn't my family's first language threw me into a whole different role where I wasn't just a child. I had to grow up translating, interpreting, and helping my family with anything they needed. It was quite difficult for me because I barely knew the language myself, but they had this trust that despite my age, I was learning and I could handle their affairs. And I was learning about immigration law through meetings with lawyers who assisted in setting up our refugee status and later citizen status. And I was learning about property law through helping them with their lawyers on the purchase of their house. I learned employment law through both of my parents' cases where they suffered injuries at work. And I became heavily involved in their cases and assisted their lawyers in preparing their case. So I was always involved in the legal profession in some way, shape, or form from a very, very young age, except I couldn't call myself a lawyer just yet. So I grew up with this love for law in general, and I was being exposed to all these areas of law and saw how all of these lawyers who were involved were bettering our lives. And I realized I wanted to help people as a career and that I could do that by becoming a lawyer myself. I didn't know at the time that I would be looking into criminal defense as I had not been exposed to it yet, but I just knew I wanted to help people and wanted to do so by being a lawyer.
Brilliant. So your background obviously got you to where you are. I think the journey that you've been on, you've obviously faced obstacles throughout your transition. Do you feel that in terms of your career, you have had to face any obstacles?
For me personally, those obstacles started way before I even entered the legal profession. As a woman, knowing I wanted a family one day, I felt the need to have my life planned out in a certain way in terms of achieving my goals to have both a career and family. I needed to think about when in my life I could try and fit in my desire to have children, where it would be the least disruptive to my career progression and where I would have the most support. And during my studies, I saw how the students who had children struggled with getting their degree. There was no support available to them to juggle parenthood and student life. And as I was one of the youngest in my law school, and at that time I knew I needed to wait a bit longer to have children, I did want to feel secure in knowing I'd achieved something for myself first. But also knowing that I did want a family, I also had to consider whether a career as a lawyer with big aspirations would even be possible in the first place. I had to think about whether I would be able to progress into senior roles and achieve the goals that I had for myself alongside raising a family. So when I started my search for a legal role after graduating university, I had an interview where one of the questions that was asked was whether or not I was interested in having a family. I'd never been asked that before, and the question was presented to me in a way where I could see the interviewer was hoping my answer was no, or at least not yet. So this left me feeling quite frustrated. I just thought to myself, I could not believe that this was a question that was being asked in an interview because my husband had many job interviews as well, and he'd never come home and said that to me, that he'd been asked a question about family life. So right off the bat, it was an eye-opener to see that as a woman, I needed to think about the sort of company I was going to be working for. It became important to find a firm where there was proof that there was support for women and mothers. I did not want to be made to feel like I could not have the best of both worlds. And luckily, I have found this working at HJA. I'm able to work part-time and take time off when needed for my daughter, but also I've been able to see the success of many of the working mothers in our firm, which is a huge inspiration for me to keep going after my dream of establishing a career for myself in this profession.
So just picking up on that, Donjeta, you clearly then, by what you've just said in terms of comparing your journey to that of your husband's, you feel that there's perhaps a disparity or an inequality between a male and a female counterpart in terms of this profession, or what you have actually experienced, a disparity between your two journeys?
Definitely both. When I started looking for a company that I would want to have my career progress in, there were areas I paid closer attention to that I'm sure my husband or male counterparts do not feel the need to pay attention to. One of the main things that I focused on during the application processes was gauging the authenticity of a firm's policy in diversity and inclusion, in particular the representation of women. So this was what drew me the most to wanting to work at HJA. I mean, almost 2/3 of the employees are women, and every time I think about that, it gives me a great sense of pride. Then there was the need to think about a company's policy on flexible working, which was another very important factor for me. I mean, I was thinking about this before I even had a child, whereas this may not have come across my male counterparts' minds when they get offered a job at a new company. Since having my daughter, my career progression has already taken a step back before I have even been able to fully qualify. I've had to take maternity leave and care for my daughter, which has delayed my progress, whereas there's been minimal impact, for example, to my husband's career progression. And even back in my university days, I was quickly made aware that most law firms are full of men and that there's not many women, especially women who want to be working mothers who really make it in the legal profession. So hearing that only made me want to work harder and break that barrier and prove myself that I am going to be one of those women that will make it and will have the beauty of a family life alongside my career.
So the International Women's Day stance for this year is break the bias. If you can just tell me, what do you think that we need to do as a profession to break the bias?
In general, I believe we are conscious to the fact that progressing in a legal profession is hard work. Anyone that is tied to this profession needs to highlight the commitment that they have to women, mostly so that women aren't put off from joining this profession. This means, being understanding to a women's commitments outside of the workspace, implementing flexible working, honest discussions regarding gender pay gaps, and an open dialogue within a firm or a company on the ever-changing support that a woman may need.
Great. Thank you so much, Donjeta. Daniel, if I can come to you as our Deputy Head of Housing and the head of our discrimination work that we do at Hodge, Jones and Allen, can you just tell me a bit about your background? And then I've got a couple of questions for you, please.
I'm about 20 years now qualified, and I've mostly worked in housing public law since I was a trainee. And I've mostly been based in London. I started my training contract in Manchester and then moved down to London. And I do, as I say, housing, discrimination, public law challenges.
So in the public law challenges that you've done, or in the areas of housing, or the cases that you've worked on, and over the past 20 years, have you noticed a change in the shift in the way women are approached or treated?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was definitely changing when I started, that women were being promoted and definitely taking on more senior roles. I've had various bosses, supervisors who are women. So I definitely noticed a change in the profession. I mean, I know from Law Society statistics that actually 51% of the profession are women, but there is a difference. In the areas that we work, and in what I would call socially conscious sort of areas of work, you know, we represent individuals, tenants, other areas like family law. A lot of women take up roles in the profession. In areas where there isn't so many numbers, especially when it comes to promotion, is the commercial. And we forget that maybe in our area of work that actually the largest number of lawyers in our profession works in the commercial sector. Tens of thousands work in the city or related to the city in banking and in commercial law. And that still is not in any way equal. And especially when it comes to promotions, for some reason, women don't get the same, you know, it'll always be outnumbered in when it comes to partnerships, etc. So there is a bit of a divide in our profession that, as I say, 51% are women, but actually still in most areas of commercial law, women still aren't represented as they should be.
Why do you think that is?
I think there is still a very macho sort of bias, especially in commercial world. I think it's very good that women take on roles, as I say, in more socially conscientious work. But at the same time, I think they're hindered. And I think from what I hear, because I don't work in that area, but I certainly know people that do, it is a very male orientated in finance and in law. There's still the old boy network, and I still think that very much exists.
Have you yourself witnessed any discrimination or difference in treatment of women during your career, both in terms of colleagues, former colleagues, or even clients?
I have certainly seen clients that want a male lawyer, and that happens. And I, of course, just refuse to even accept that as anyway in an argument. And I certainly just say that that will not be something that we would consider. I don't care what the choice is, except when it comes to very sensitive issues. We represent women who are abused. And so I can obviously see that another woman who's been abused domestically in a domestic violence case would like a female lawyer. That's absolutely fine. But in terms of just generally wanting a male lawyer because they think it's better, then that's not to be accepted. I probably have seen discrimination, and I probably have just not picked it up. I'm sure that that's been the way. I have, though, noticed one thing. As I say, I've had female bosses and supervisors, and they've always been absolutely fantastic when I was a junior lawyer and trainee. However, I have seen women being much tougher on female colleagues, women who are great towards myself as a junior lawyer, and they're in a senior position. But actually, when it comes to other women, they've been much harsher. And I've had female colleagues sort of mention this to me. It might be a sort of, you know, the pulling up the ladder sort of thing, which is a very sad thing, obviously, but that can happen.
So like an assertion or an assistance to their peers?
Yeah, I think there's an element of I've done it And I'm not going to, it's the Margaret Thatcher sort of attitude. She refused to be persuaded by feminism and join the feminist movement. And she only had men in her cabinet. And her reason was, I've done it. I can deal with the boys' club. Stop your whinging. And I have seen that at times. And it is very sad, I think, because obviously they've managed to succeed and they've got themselves into a higher position. But I don't know, you maybe be able to explain it better than me, why they sort of have a slight attitude about other women who are junior.
Thank you, Dan. And my last question for you is, what does International Women's Day mean to you in terms of the perspective of the opposite sex?
I think it's great. My late mother was a feminist, and she was born in the late 1930s, and she grew up in a very traditional Irish Catholic background, which means that she was very much put into a role by her own family, and certainly not by my father, who was a very different man. He wished her to do anything she wanted, but she felt that she had to, be a housewife and a mother, and she, I think, lost a lot of confidence, and there was enormous social pressure. But with all of that, she was a very, very strong feminist and wanted that women should be treated equally. And she certainly taught that to myself. And she's always been an inspiration. So I think it's terrific. And I hope that it's very much celebrated. And it's a very much an ongoing journey as well. I certainly do not think that women are treated equally. I think you have a much rougher time than I have and I've had as my career progressed. So I wish you all the very best.
Thank you, Dan. And last but by no means least, Chun, since joining Hodge, Jones and Allen, have always been in awe of your career and your achievements. So for me, more from a personal perspective, I would love to know about your journey as to arriving where you are and being one of the leaders of our firm.
That's very kind of you, Bahareh. So I qualified in 2005. I joined Hodge, Jones and Allen in 2007. So I was a very junior solicitor at that stage, about 18 months qualified, very young, very naive. But I've been very lucky to work at firms, including Hodge, Jones and Allen, where the majority of the workforce are women. And that includes women in senior roles. And actually, all the major life events for me happened at Hodge, Jones and Allen. I got married. I had 2 children while I was at Hodge, Jones and Allen, and I was promoted to associate in 2010, partner in 2014, and joined the board in 2017.
Great. During your journey, have you faced any obstacles to arrive at where you are now?
Yes. I think as a woman, whether consciously or subconsciously, I think there is always a concern that you will have to work harder than your male counterparts, and that being a female, especially one who has children, will set you back in your career. And I've been very lucky at Hodge, Jones and Allen that you don't see those obstacles in the same way, but certainly as a junior dealing with external people and third parties, you realise there are still very old-fashioned views on women in law, and they do treat you differently. Luckily, as you get more and more senior, you see a lot less of that. And also whether that's because moving with the times, people get pulled up about it and there is more support from your male counterparts that that's not appropriate behaviour in this day and age. But also sometimes I think the obstacles can be self-imposed in terms of, your own background. I was brought up in a very traditional family where my mother was the main carer for the children, stayed at home, etc. And when I had children, obviously, as a woman, you are still the main carer. So I dropped down to working 4 days a week, primarily because I wanted to do things like school pickups on a Monday, particularly pick up, drop off. But other than dropping off the children and picking them up, actually, I ended up working for most of the day. That was supposed to be my day off. And you then think, would your male counterparts ever think about doing 4 days a week for those exact reasons? In fact, you were doing more than 5 days worth of work, but I think you felt like you needed to compensate as a working mother. But in fact, you just work more efficiently. You work around, drop off, pick up, you work later, you work earlier. And so, it's about breaking down those misconceptions that you work less harder just because you're a working mother or work part-time. But as I said, it's been a long journey, but I've been very lucky to have the support of my husband, my family, but also the firm and all the male colleagues at the firm, which I think is very important because it's all about supporting each other and having a very flexible and sympathetic and understanding work environment.
Do you feel that your journey perhaps was harder, what you went through 10 years ago, as opposed to someone currently going through the same journey that you went through in terms of transitioning motherhood and the career and the progression at Hodge, Jones and Allen? Do you think there's more openness and support than perhaps what was available then?
I think so. As I said, I think, we have moved on in the 10 years or so. There is more awareness, there's more support, and also because there are actually more women in the roles and in senior roles. So they have been through it. They are more supportive, they're more understanding of juniors going through the same process. Obviously, we've got a long way to go, but it is certainly, I hope, easier for women to enter the profession and to move up the ranks.
Brilliant. And Chun, how does it feel to be one of the female leaders in our firm?
I don't feel special because I don't think I was the first and certainly won't be the last in terms of being a female in a senior role. And to be fair, day to day, you don't even give a second thought to the fact that you're a female in a senior role because you're surrounded by females in your team, across the firm, even in senior roles, whether it's the board, heads of departments, the senior management team. It is dominated by females. And I think there is, when you're in a senior role as a female, you have a responsibility, I think, to provide a good role model for the juniors coming through, but also to send a positive message that being a female does not set you back. You can become whatever you want, partner, senior management, as long as you work hard. Your gender does not define you.
As I said at the outset, the theme for this year's International Women's Day campaign is Break the Bias, which means to break inequality and raise awareness against bias by taking action for equality. What do you think? What actions should we be undertaking as females, males, binary, non-binary, employed, non-employed parents? What should we be doing?
We should be breaking the bias. We shouldn't let your gender, as I said, define or confine you. It's all about supporting each other, but also calling out inequality. I think it's very easy to not make it your problem when you see inequality, whether that's within the firm, outside the firm. And it's about raising awareness because obviously the problem is if you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. So there has to be constant dialogue and awareness. And I don't know if that's why International Women's Day is so important, because it is one day where it's in the forefront of everybody's mind, it's in the media, etc. And it is just engaging and having that constant dialogue and always looking at what can we do better, because as I said, there is a long way to go. And there's always something we can be doing better to make it more equal for women.
Thank you very much. I just want to say a big thank you to Daniel, Donjeta and Chun for your time. And I look forward to celebrating International Women's Day on the 8th of March with all of you and everyone else.
You've been listening to the London Legal Podcast, presented to you by Hodge, Jones and Allen Solicitors.